Chasing Giants with Don Higgins and Terry Pier. Brought to you by Osseo Camo, nature's most lethal camouflage. Follow along as Don and Terry discuss the techniques, strategies, and dedication needed to harvest one of God's most amazing creations, world-class whitetails.
Well, welcome everyone to this week's Chasing Giants podcast with Don Higgins. I'm Terry Pier. We're brought to you by Osseo Gear. Don, it is episode 224, dropping on June 2nd. June is here. We got a great show, a couple interesting topics that I'm excited to talk with you about tonight. Fawns are dropping. We're going to talk about saving fawns and what's going on in the physiological world of a fawn. We're going to talk about farming for nutrients tonight, and I think this is an interesting topic that you've maybe even changed your approach in the last year and even learned some new things in the last month, and we're going to talk about that, and then we got some great questions. But first of all, what went on this week? What'd you get into?
Well, I can't believe June's here already. You know, another month where we're getting those trail cameras out, and June is probably the month where I do the least in terms of my deer hunting. Now I'm on top of my plots and different little projects around the farm, but when it comes to, you know, really chasing the giants and everything else, this is probably the month that I do the least. But, you know, this week I was spraying weeds. I started spraying for cicadas till I realized that was a waste of time and gave up on that project. All my fruit trees got one spraying, but it had no effect on the cicadas. And to be honest, those things are not hurting the trees anyway, like I thought they would. I got on the internet and did some research on them when I went out and seen they were all over some of my apple trees. And, you know, I thought they would eat the leaves and totally defoliate the trees, but they don't. They'll get on the bark and they will burrow into the branch and they lay their eggs in the branch or the trunk of the tree. And then that larva will hatch and it will drop to the ground, and then it burrows into the ground, and only to hatch so many years later. And so these cicadas are on my trees, not to eat them, but to lay their eggs. Now, sometimes the female cicada has a little saw-like thing on her rear end that she saws into that tree branch to deposit her eggs. And sometimes when they get on that new growth out on the ends of the branches, she will saw that off and you'll lose that new growth. Like I said, I don't think there's much you can do about it because I tried 2 different sprays and neither one of them seemed to work.
Well, I think they come back as fast as you might be able to get rid of them. I was at a friend's house down in Tennessee this week, and he lives on a lake, big lake, and he's got so many birds that in the morning when you wake up, you can hear the cicadas. But by the afternoon, they are completely gone because all of the birds around that big lake are just munching like crazy. And obviously the fish are eating good too, but the birds are happy right now.
Yeah, I guess turkeys love them. I mean, I can see why. These things they're not like a fly, you know, where they're hard to catch. These things are easy to catch. And man, they are absolutely loaded on certain trees. That's one thing I noticed about when I was spraying my fruit trees. So I've got countless varieties of apple trees and fruit trees on my farm. And I noticed that some trees are just absolutely loaded and other trees don't have hardly a single cicada on them. And I'm sure it's got to do with the variety. Now, I don't know what makes one variety more attractive to a cicada than another. But, you know, one thing about the trees that the apple trees that Gingrich Tree Farm is selling. You know, last summer, Steve and I went to Ohio and did a video for the Whitetail Master Academy on that research that went into those trees. So it started with a old orchard that had been abandoned, and nothing had been done to that orchard as far as maintenance or upkeep for 20 years. And a lot of the trees had died, but there was a handful of trees scattered throughout that orchard that looked fantastic, like they had been maintained. Those were the parent trees of the trees that Jay Gingrich is selling. And so those are trees that have some sort of natural pest resistance and disease resistance built into them. And I could see it on because I knew some of the trees I planted this spring where I put Jay's. I got a bunch of trees from Jay, and I got some from Blue Hill Wildlife Nursery, and I planted an orchard that's got about 40 trees in it, and then some smaller plantings as well. But I knew where I stuck these trees from Jay, and even got some trees that are not yet available to the public from Jay and Andy. And those trees did not seem to have near the cicadas on them that some of the others did.
Speaking of that just a little bit, we're going to get off topic. We didn't prep for this, but you have planted so many different varieties of trees on your farm. Do you have a map or a list, or do you just go off memory of what tree is what? And we were talking about oak trees last week. They're in front of the house.
Yeah.
Where you get the different varieties. Do you just remember all of this like you remember farms, or do you keep a grid of what varieties you put out?
Well, I wish I would have kept better notes, and I don't know. Most of my apple trees, I have no idea. I've got apple trees from more different sources than you could count.
Right.
But this new orchard, I did label all those trees. So whenever, you get a tree, it's usually got that plastic label around it that tells the variety. So I took those plastic labels off the trees and I attached it to the wire cage, the top of the wire cage at each tree, so I can note what each tree is. If I see one that I really like or really don't, I can take note of it. But it never even dawned on me back years ago when I started planting these trees to keep better track. I sure wish I would have. Now, I do know what a lot of them are, don't get me wrong, but there are plenty that I have no idea, especially some of the crab apples, because there's a lot of these crab apples that were basically hand-selected by whatever nursery I was buying from at the time and given some sort of trade name. And I've got those all over my farm and have absolutely no idea what they are.
Yeah. Well, one of the other topics that you posted on social media about this week is fawns. Obviously, fawns are starting to drop. I've had everything from a couple pictures. I've had a fawn in my backyard coming out of the alfalfa field. The mom leaves it up there. You posted, and always pictures of fawns. It happens every year. People want to relocate and rescue fawns, but, deer hunters understand what's going on with the process of Mother Nature and what that mother's trying to do, leaving those fawns. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the picture I posted was not this year's fawns, but I was getting so many pictures sent to me by text or private message or whatever of fawns, and hearing stories of people hitting fawns with hay mowers or whatever, that even though I haven't found any myself yet, I felt it was pretty important to make a post. So I went back through my files and I found a picture of a fawn that I'd found a couple of years back or so. And you know what happens when those fawns are born? For about a week to 10 days, maybe 2 weeks, those fawns do not move. I mean, they'll lay down in their bed, and basically that's where they stay for the most part. And it's Mother Nature's way protecting them, because they are not strong enough or fast enough to flee and get away from a predator. And I remember when I had my captive deer, that those fawns, for the first week, it was just a matter of walking through the pen and finding them, and you could reach down and pick them up because they were not going to run from you. Now, by the time they were 2 weeks old, it was a totally different story. It was like trying to catch a rabbit. Again, it's just Mother Nature's way. They're going to lay there. If you're mowing, they're going to lay there and let you run right over. You could miss them by 6 inches on one pass and come back, and they haven't moved. You're going to hit them on the next pass. Extremely difficult to see. They've got those spots, they're camouflaged, and they lay in those tall grass and weeds, and that's what they really like is grassy. They're not in the woods near as much as they are on the grassy edges, grass waterways, hay fields, wheat fields, things like that is where you find most of them. And a lot of them, thousands of them get killed every year by farm equipment. And I was just throwing out that warning for people to be on the lookout, and because we're right in the peak period for fawns to be born right now. Now, there were some that were born earlier, and there'll be some born, in the weeks to come. Right. But we are right in the peak of when a lot of fawns are being born.
You and I both many years ago started doing all of our bush hogging early. We would mow early, and we will not mow again and probably till after July 4th. Just, now mowing hay is a little bit different story because you and I both have alfalfa and have to get it off. Do you do anything specific? Do you walk your alfalfa, or do you go real slow and just try to watch, or what do you do?
Well, I no longer have any alfalfa on my farm that I bale. I
Okay.
quit baling. I was doing that for a number of years, and I did one year. I hit 2 fawns, and I mean, that's a terrible feeling when you know you've just hit a fawn. But I would. The thing of it is it is so hard to see them things, even if you get out and you're going to cut even a small 3 or 5 acre field. You could get out and walk that field, and there could be a half a dozen fawns there, and you don't see a one of them because you literally almost have to step on them. And there's really no substitute for delaying your mowing, but I totally understand that, if farming is your business, your livelihood, you can't just let that hay crop sit out there all summer as you're waiting on the fawns to grow up. But if you could mow early, like I've mowed about every place I'm going to mow on my farm, and I did that a couple weeks back, and now I won't mow again for a good month or so, and the places I'm mowing, it won't be near as tall. Even when I go to mow it the second time, it won't be near as tall. And those fawns really like to get in that taller stuff. If you got weeds and grasses that are waist high or so, that's the kind of stuff they really like to be in.
Yeah, I mean, we have found so many in the alfalfa. I mean, and then you get the the city people or the urban people that they show up in the flower bed or on the back porch. I saw one on social media the other day where it was laying on the welcome mat on the front porch, and the mad panic of, oh no, the mother's dead, or it's orphaned, we got to bottle feed it. And I guess it happens sometimes, but not what's going on usually.
No, usually the mother is not close to her fawn. She doesn't bed near them. And again, it's Mother Nature's way of protecting that fawn. That doe, she's going to attract the attention of any predator that comes along, so she doesn't bed by her fawns. And if you got twin fawns, those twins won't be bedded together. Those twin fawns will probably be 100 yards or more apart. And the mother leaves them there. And again, it's for survival. If a predator comes along and finds one fawn, there's a good chance he's not going to find both of them, and one of them will survive. So, when God created these critters, he sure gave them, he sure thought out all the details to give them the best chance of survival. And these fawns are no exception.
Yeah, it was interesting, the comments from last week's podcast that we got. I don't know how many private messages you got, but how many dead yearling bucks that people had started realizing and seeing. It was like, okay, now that we're watching for it, it's holy smoke. There's probably, we went to Northern Kentucky, which is about a 30-minute drive for us a couple days ago, and there was 6 dead deer along Interstate 75 just in a 30-minute drive, and every one of them was small little yearling bucks.
Yeah, this is a time of the year with a high activity in the deer herd. I mean, you got the yearling animals, both bucks and to some degree, a much lesser degree, but to some degree, the yearling does are dispersing, and then you got the mature does giving birth to fawns. So this is a high, and the bucks are getting in their bachelor groups if they're not already. But there's always those new bucks joining up with the bachelor group. So this is probably the time of the second most or the second highest period of activity in the course of a year for the deer, following only the rut. The rut is the only time of the year where there's going to be more deer activity than what we're seeing right now.
I don't know about you, but I was thinking about this the other day while I was driving. I had some windshield time. This time of the year right now is probably the second highest period of anticipation for me for the year. And the first one is when you first put those cameras out from July 4th, waiting for that first pull or getting the cell pictures. What bucks are here that I can target, what bucks survived, what bucks are back. But right now, I mean, you go out to those food plots, all of my beans and corn are up. The fawns are being born. just so high of anticipation of everything to come, not only for this year, but for years to come. I mean, it's a very, very fun, exciting time of year for me.
Oh, me too. I mean, I want to go check my plots every day. I'd force myself not to, but this is the time of the year where they're sprouting, and if you just stay away for 3 or 4 days and come back, you can see growth on the plants previous visit. When I go look at my plots, it's hard telling what I'm going to see out there feeding in them. It might be, pheasants or rabbits or deer or who knows.
Right.
So, lots of animals on the move this time of the year. They're giving birth to their young as well. I'm seeing more quail on my farm this year than I have ever seen ever in my life. And I cannot hardly go back and do anything that I'm not running into quail. And that's
Wow.
a good thing. And I've done a little bit to try to provide some habitat for them, especially on this new 40 that I got that joins me. I planted some pollinator mixes and such. Those quail really feed on the seeds from those pollinator mixes, like the partridge pea is a real big one that provides a lot of food for those little quail. And just some of the other wildflowers, the seeds that fall off of those flowers is what feeds those birds. And seeing more of those than ever. So exciting
awesome.
time of the year for sure.
Yep. All right, well, let's take a break and listen to the folks from Osseo, and we'll be back in just a minute to talk about farming for nutrition before we answer our questions for this week. Stay tuned.
Osseo Gear has perfected one of the most innovative camo patterns on the market. The unique camo pattern designed to mimic the feather patterns of one of North America's greatest predators, the great horned owl. Combined with intuitive features, superior comfort, and ultra high quality fabrics give bow hunters the ultimate advantage. Osseo has outfitted over 10,000 bow hunters across the country with over 1,000 5-star reviews. Visit asiogear.com to check it out for yourself. Use code CHASINGGIANTS for 15% off.
Okay, Don. This topic of farming for nutrition, it's been on your mind the last couple weeks. We've talking about it on the podcast, and just to start the conversation is going to be quite interesting as we look at what farmers harvesting or growing for yield, but food plotters, we're changing and adapting what we do to farm for nutrition, and I think it's going to be a great talking point and hearing some insight from you. But before we do that, I want to take just a minute and put a slide up for you to comment on for your summer speaking schedule. And I realize that there's a lot of people that watch this on YouTube, but there's so many people that listen on the audio platforms or on MTech, and we're not going to go through this every week. But I would like you to go through it week 1 here just to walk through it, and people can get their pens and take notes. And I want to remind everybody, this list will be published on the Real World Wildlife Products website. So if you ever have a question, you don't necessarily have to go back to the podcast and find this segment. You can pull up the Real World website and go to events or trade shows, and this list will be on there. But bear with us for a couple minutes as Don reads down through his speaking schedule through the month of July.
Yeah, so this schedule that we've got on the screen right now is only for the month of July. I've got a couple other events in late August that I'll be at as well, but we're just going to stick with July for now. So it starts out on the 18th. I'll be up in Wisconsin, Johnson Creek, Wisconsin, to be specific, at Milford Hills Hunt Club. They've got quite an event. I've been there before. They're one of our real world dealers. I've consulted on the property for Lloyd and Royce Marks, who own and operate this hunt club. They got a fantastic clubhouse. I mean, this place is fancy, and they're going to have a prime rib meal with this seminar. You need to get tickets for it. That Johnson Creek, Wisconsin event on July 18th. If you're interested, you need to call 920-699-2249. They need reservations so they can prepare the meal. And then I'm going on a trip out east. Going to help our distributor out there, Eastern Outdoors. They're basically setting up this with some of the real world dealers out that way. Be 6 consecutive days starting July 22nd. I'm going to be in Panama, New York at Ravelin Hill Archery. For more information on that one, call 716-355-8841. The next day on July 23rd, I'm going to be at Miller's Bulk Foods and Bakery, another real world dealer in Medina, New York. The number there is 595-409-1478. Next evening will be July 24th. I'm going to be at Northeast Metal Roofing, another real world dealer in Penn Yan, New York. The number there, 585-554-0200. Then on July 25th, Hidden Camp Farm at Canajoharie, New York. Number there, 518-859-3310. On the 26th of July, I'll be at Deer Creek Farm in Walden, New York, 516-322-4577. So I got 5 days in a row in New York. You New York guys, who knows, this may be my final trip. I'm getting older, so this may be my final trip to New York. Then the last one is July 27th. I'm going to be in Richland, Pennsylvania at Little Mountain Outfitters. The number there, 717-821-1891. And one thing I'll throw out is I'll ask you guys, if you got questions about any of these events, call the numbers that I've listed here, because I don't know any of the details. All I've been given is the date and time to show up. I am not at all responsible for, I know there's going to be food at all these events. But I have no idea if it's free, if there's a cost, if you need to make reservations or whatever. So please call these numbers to get your details.
And like I said, visit the Real World website on trade shows and events. This will be up there in the next couple days. We'll make a graphic and also put this on Don Higgins's social media page and also on mine. That way people can reference it. But hopefully you guys in those local areas can get out and visit Don. I got a feeling that you're going to have a couple guys on that New York stint that just basically follow you around the state for 4 days. I think there's going to be a couple people at multiple events up there. We got some really good friends in that area of the country, don't we?
Yeah, we do. So it'll be, I've actually done a tour up there in the Northeast a couple of summers ago. I wasn't just in New York. I went clear up to Maine, Vermont, several states up that way. I was just out east as far as Maryland and Delaware this past winter. So looking to make a big push in the east, northeast for real world wildlife products. We got some great dealers out there. We got a fantastic distributor that are doing a good job. And I just want to help bring some attention to those businesses and, hopefully help them grow and be successful.
All right, fantastic. Well, let's get back on topic to farming for nutrition as compared to the idea of a row crop farmer farming for yield. And it's a much, much different approach. It's going to, regenerative farming obviously has something to do with this, but seed selection type of product. Although we were really impressed with the yield of everything we did last year, our yields were actually really good on corn. Talk about this idea that's kind of been in the back of your mind for the last couple of weeks, and let's dive into it.
Well, it kind of dawned on me here recently. I got a call from Dwayne Hopkins, and he had some corn he wanted me to test, and he wanted to know if I had a plot open that we could plant this corn. And I'd already planted all my plots, and, the ones that have been planted in soybeans, they've got a soybean residual. I can't work one of them up and plant it in corn with that residual herbicide. But I got to thinking, I planted 3 plots in soil charge, and I wanted to test this corn really bad that he's got. So I told him, I said, I can terminate one of those soil charge plots and I can plant this corn. So while I'm in the process of doing that, I got to thinking, the typical ag farmer he's trying for yield. He wants to produce as many bushels per acre as he possibly can, and because he gets paid by the bushel. And, if he grows 250 bushels of corn that's 9% protein. He's not going to get any more money for that corn than if he grows 250 bushels at 7% protein. So he's got no incentive really, unless he's got a special market where he's getting a premium. He's got no incentive to grow higher nutrient or grains. And on the other hand, I'm just the opposite. I'm trying to grow giant bucks. And in the state of Illinois, I cannot put out mineral. I cannot put out supplemental feed. Everything I do for my deer herd has to be done nutrition-wise. It has to pretty much be done through my food plots. You know, I can also plant the fruit trees and things like that. But so I want those food plots and any other food source that I'm providing, I want them to be as nutrient dense as I possibly can. In other words, I want the highest levels of protein, you know, fat, carbohydrates, the whole works, and all the micronutrients. It's really, that whole mindset has really changed my approach to my food plots, because the real key for me is I get all these deer here in the wintertime. So in the summertime, these deer around my area, they've got thousands and thousands of acres of corn and soybeans to feed on, and, you know, alfalfa, clover, the whole works. And they don't summer on my farm very much anyway. Most of the time they're summering elsewhere, the bucks are, and then they show up here in the fall. But in the wintertime, I've got those deer here. I've got them here every day. They're feeding in my plots every day, all winter long, and it usually starts in the fall. A lot of deer will be here in October, and whatever's here in October will stay through the rut, and then in December I start getting even more bucks. I want to get those deer through the winter in the best shape possible, in the best condition to grow a giant set of antlers a year from now. So the plots that I planted this spring, here in the recent weeks, say here in the last 30 days, all these plots that I have planted, these plots are really not set up to grow giant bucks this summer or even, you know, as an attraction this fall. My plots are primarily here to grow giant racks in the summer of 25. Because those deer are going to be here in the winter of 24-25 ahead of next year's antler growing season, and they're going to be feeding in my plots. So I want the maximum nutrient content in all these crops that I'm growing. And so I've started doing some, you know, regenerative ag type stuff. And, you know, the more I get into it, the more I learn. I think I mentioned on the last episode, I've got a friend in Iowa, Jack, who's a farmer who's doing a lot of this regenerative ag. And, you know, he's been instrumental in pointing me in the right direction. And I got Mike Mitchell with Mike's Mighty Micros and Oak Hall Valley Orchard there at Sullivan that I lean on a lot as well. But I just learned more and more. And, you know, here in recent weeks, you know, one of the things I found out is, you know, we're putting these fungicides on a lot of our seed. This ag seed especially comes that way. And it's actually kind of counterproductive to soil health, because what makes the soil healthy is the bacteria and the fungus that lives within the soil. And we put these fungicides on our seed, and basically we're killing that good fungus that makes our soil better. So this year, you know, I planted the seed that was treated like always. Next year I'm going to get with Dwayne, and I'm going to get some untreated seed to plant in my plots. But the more I learn, you know, another thing I've learned recently is that one of the worst things for regenerative ag is glyphosate. Glyphosate will kill that bacteria and fungus in the soil as well. One of the worst things for your soil. So, you know, I'm looking at alternatives for that too. You know, I've learned that rye gives off a toxin that prevents a lot of weeds. If you've got a decent stand of rye, there won't hardly be a weed in it, because that rye gives off a toxin that keeps the weeds down. Well, it makes a fantastic cover crop. Actually, it's a good crop, fall planted crop for your deer anyway, good green source. But then when it comes back in the spring, it holds the weeds back and keeps the weeds back. So you can come in that rye and you can drill soybeans, and they'll do fantastic. Corn, not so much, because that toxin that's in the rye will affect your corn. But with soybeans, you can put them right into rye. So I'm working on crop rotations. I'm working on, you know, new products, the humic acid that we're applying to our soil that Real World now sells. is something that I put on all my plots this year. And I'm trying new products. I'm going to be doing some tissue samples on side-by-side trials on my farm, testing different products. But my goal here is not yield. It's not to produce more bushels per acre, but I'm looking to boost the nutrient contents. One example is my I got 2 different soybean plots that on half of each plot, I applied that humic acid before planting at about 250 pounds per acre. And then this summer, when I go to spray those plots to kill the weeds, the one side that has the humic, I'm going to treat it with the Mike's Mighty Micros at the same time, and probably do 2 or 3 applications. And then I'm going to take tissue samples of those leaves while that plant is green and growing, and see if there's a difference in one side of the plot or the other. But then I'm going to do it again in the fall once that plant is dried down and the grain is, ready to be harvested. If you was going to harvest it, I'm going to take a grain sample from each side, and I'm going to compare the nutrients. My goal is that, I can grow the most nutrient-dense plants possible in my plots to help my deer herd.
I think my thoughts, as you were talking there, is more about the industry, and I don't want to make this a real-world commercial, but I think that the industry as a whole went through a couple phases in its lifetime, and one of them was, we're going to put fancy packaging around ag seed, and whether it was a big buck or a female or whatever, creative graphics, make it appeal to the deer hunter on the shelf. And then the fad is as companies come and go, they pop up, and for example, a Nebraska blend, and they have these volleyball size turnips or bulbs, and I don't think people truly understand the difference that we're trying to do with what your whole conversation is, and us pushing the limits of treated, untreated, non-GMO, GMO. We are truly striving for everything we do with Real World to go after nutrient-rich products. And the reason no one else follows with that example is the amount of time, money, and effort it takes to get a product to development. It's really easy to go and get a variety that might put a lot of tons out, or get a big size of something, a bulb out. But the amount of years it takes to do what we're doing and the cost associated to bring something to market's a lot. And that's why I love this company. And we have always taken a different approach. We're always looking. You and I even planted a different type of Roundup Ready soybean this year that's untreated. But just the constant innovation that we're trying to do to appeal for a whitetail to not only be attracted, but to stay and to grow healthy on your property versus, hey, I'm going to produce something the size of a basketball, but I don't think about whether the deer wants to eat it or not. It's a much different approach.
Yeah, and a lot of the real world products actually started with a problem that I encountered.
Yeah,
and I'll give you
right.
An example is the new fertilizers that we've came out with, and I just applied one to the new corn plot yesterday. It was supposed to rain last night, which it did, and so I applied that fertilizer to that new corn plot that Dwayne got me the seed for, and corn hadn't even sprouted yet, but good time to get that fertilizer on. But it's one thing to read that fertilizer, and this one was, the number was 2788, high in nitrogen. The first number is nitrogen, so it's high in nitrogen, which the corn needs. What makes these fertilizers different is the micronutrients that are in them. So not only do we have the N, P, and K, we got the micronutrients that those plants need. Right. So if you go to the Real World website and dig into these fertilizers, I don't think there's anything else out there like it. And the reason these were developed is this whole process of me trying to get the most nutrient-dense plots on my farm for the deer herd. And I'll throw out also that you and I are going to be talking about a new product here in probably the next week or two. This product, everybody in the hunting industry pretty much ought to be buying it from Real World, because it's something that everybody uses, and we're trying to be the cheapest source But it started out with a problem that I'm facing myself. And I figure if it's a problem for me as a deer hunter land manager, it's probably a problem for others. And I'm trying to address it the best way I can, at the same time help others.
So just a much different approach, but I love that just as everybody's driving around this week, start thinking about that with your food plots and your habitat plan and how it's different from a farmer. And there's nothing wrong. A farmer's being paid for that. So, they're doing an ROI calculation for input cost versus yield. They want to get the most yield for the smallest input cost. So that balance of how much fertilizer is worth the return. That's why, this, what do they call it? Adaptive fertilizer rates, where, different parts of the field get different rates. That's not the right term, but I can't think of it off the top of my head. But, it's for us, people call us all the time and say, why can't you do a Roundup Ready corn? Well, that's getting away from what we're trying to do as a food plotter, away from a local ag product. And that is give the most we can to that animal so that they are attracted, they stay, and they grow. So let's move.
Well, and
go ahead.
The other thing is these nutrient-rich plants are actually more attractive to the deer. They are more attractive. You could have the NutriCrave corn is a perfect example. You can put NutriCrave next to a regular ag corn, and the deer are going to hammer the NutriCrave. I got a call this week from Tanner Stay. His dad is Toby Stay. Anybody that's been around Illinois whitetails for any amount of time probably recognizes the name. These guys, one of the things they do currently is they've got a group called the Whitetail Group. They got a YouTube channel and such. But anyway, I was talking to Tanner this week, and he says, I don't get on to hyped up products too much, but he says, I want to tell you that NutriCrave corn we planted last year is a real deal. Biggest ears I ever seen on corn. And he says, I watched deer walk through other standing corn a quarter-mile away to come to the NutriCrave corn and eat it. So it's always nice to hear from somebody that has experience and knows what they're talking about, to give you a attaboy for one of your products. And so I just appreciate hearing those things. And it tells us that we're on the right track too.
Yeah, but we're not staying put. We're always pushing for the next thing. That's
Absolutely.
We've never been content. So, well, let's move on to the first question of the night and get through some of these. We got some good ones that you picked out. This is actually a question we had for last week, but we didn't get to it. So we'll start off with that one.
Yeah, this one comes from Jason Berner from Schererville, Indiana. It says, hello, Don and Terry. I've noticed a lot of young bucks on mineral so far this summer, more than I'm used to seeing come later in the summer. Many of these are younger bucks. My question is if the maternal does will get aggressive to these younger bucks and drive them and their presence away from the sanctuaries as fawns start to drop. I guess time will tell if these bucks maintain a presence all season, but I feel like I've seen some young bucks hit cameras early like this before, but once fawns drop, those pictures are a lot fewer and farther between than the daily visits I am seeing now. Well, Jason, with these younger yearling bucks, the thing that I've noticed for a lot of years is that it's a constant rotation almost of new bucks coming. And you might have yearling bucks that show up and stay all summer and then they leave in the fall, or they may show up midsummer and they may stay through the fall, or they may be here for a week and then they're gone. They may just pass through for a day. It's just a continual movement with these yearling bucks. They're dispersing from their birth area. They're trying to find a new home range, and there's just no rhyme nor reason to when they're going to show up, where they came from, or how long they're going to stay. The whole maternal aggression thing that you mentioned, there's probably something to that. I mean, a 1.5-year-old buck shows up where a mature doe has got fawns. She's probably not going to tolerate him too well, and he's just going to continue on his journey looking for a new home range. So that's probably the best way that I can explain what's going on with these yearling bucks right now. Is it's just a constant movement here and there with no rhyme nor reason whatsoever to where they're going, what they're doing, or how long they're going to stay.
I do like in this case, and this really wasn't Jason's question, but this is why when we're putting plans together in a state that allows mineral, I do like to have different mineral locations around, because I have seen some of that aggressiveness, not necessarily to a yearling buck, but having a little bit more choices in places that you don't put intrusion on a property. You know, I don't like going deep into cover for mineral, but I do like having a few different choices for that, just to provide a little bit more opportunity for different deer, because we've all seen it. If somebody hasn't seen a real aggressive doe push other deer off either a feeder or mineral, they haven't been around it very long. So I do like to do that for that reason.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's move on to question number 2.
Okay, this one was from Kelly Shanley from Allegan, Michigan. It says, Don and Terry, I recently planted 40 apple and pear trees from Gingrich this spring, and we run into a major gypsy moth caterpillar infestation this year in our county. With some help from Jay and some online groups, it seems like we have them under control now using BT and 7 dust, but some major defoliation has already happened. What would you recommend on addressing insects with fruit tree plantings for any preventive measures, and also anything that might help recovery once damage has occurred? Well, Kelly, to be honest, on my farm, when I've done tree plantings, I pretty much baby them the first year, whatever they need. They get it. Even if they need watered, they'll get watered. The second year, they get a little bit of care, whatever it takes to keep them going. The third year, it's survival. From the third year on, it's survival of the fittest. You know, I said I just tried going out and spraying for cicadas. First time I've ever done that. You know, we get things like Japanese beetles. I don't know, some of the other bugs that will show up and will be hard on the trees. And for whatever reason, they're attracted to some specific trees more than they are others. And I just decided years ago that I'm not going to spend the rest of my days babying a tree, because I know someday I'm going to be too old and not be able to do it. I'm not going to expect my grandkids or whoever to do it. If a tree dies, I would just as soon it die in the first year or two after I plant it. And if it does, I'll yank it out of the ground and I'll stick another one there, and I'll find one that will survive. And I think that's the best approach for a land manager. The last thing we want to be doing is creating habitat that needs constant maintenance and constant chemicals sprayed on it. So, you know, you can use some of the products like that you mentioned, like the 7 dust or whatever. And they also make a liquid 7 that I was spraying this week. But, you know, once I've babied that tree for a year or two, it's on its own. It's either going to make it or it's going to die. And if it dies, I'm going to yank up the dead trunk and I'm going to stick a new one there, and we'll see if it makes it.
All right. Next question. Probably wasn't the answer to that everybody's going to think you were going to ask on that one, but.
Well, we don't have time to be spending the rest of our lives spraying trees. I don't prune my fruit trees either, by the way. I mean, when they're young, I will prune them to get a good branch structure started.
Right.
But once they're a couple of years old or been planted a couple of years, they're on their own. I mean, I get them shaped up when they're young and let them go. Next question comes from Dave Armstrong from Urbandale, Iowa. It says, Don, I think harvesting a true old giant buck today is tougher than ever because of technology. Cell cams now allow hunters to constantly monitor food plots, and when a nice buck shows up, they go in to kill the buck. The problem is most of these are young bucks with good genetics that are being shot. Today you have muzzle loaders that can shoot 500 plus yards and make late season hunting over food a piece of cake. Crossbows are now heavily used in states that allow them during the archery season. All these factors and others are causing way more young, good genetic bucks to be shot. This makes it difficult to get the great genetic bucks to old age. Today, if a good genetic buck is in a particular area, all the hunters around know about him due to cell cameras, and almost certainly he will be shot or wounded. For the hunters out there truly chasing the old 5-plus high-scoring bucks, it is getting tougher and tougher each year to find them. I constantly hear friends and hunters from the best big buck areas in the USA saying they just don't have any old good genetic giants to chase. Most of the older class bucks are cull type bucks that survive because no one wants to shoot them. What are your thoughts on this, and what do you see in future years? Well, Dave, you are absolutely 100% correct. You know, I've heard a lot of comments here in recent weeks and months from southern Iowa hunters. You know, southern Iowa is probably the #1 trophy buck spot on the planet. And these guys are saying the same thing. The bucks just aren't there. I talked to someone, who was it? I don't remember who it was, but someone in the last couple of weeks that had a great farm in Iowa that used to produce booners every year and 200-inch bucks in that neighborhood on a fairly regular basis. And today they can't seem to hardly get the bucks over 160. And you listed a bunch of reasons. And, you know, we can blame whatever. I think the regulations have been designed to cut down on the age structure of the herd. I think it goes back to the whole CWD nonsense, where the older animals are more likely to have CWD, which may or may not be true, probably is. But so these state game agencies, they want to kill these deer through hunters before they reach the older age classes. And, you know, the regulations that I see are not really favoring the deer. They're favoring the hunters trying to kill the deer, which I don't think is a good thing. However, I will say that I've just recently learned about Iowa imposing some new regulations. I don't think they're allowing any trail cameras on public land now. And I could be wrong on this. And I think that they will not. Cell cameras are outlawed everywhere, and all cameras are outlawed on public land. And if someone knows the details about this, send us a submission or comment here in this video so that we can address it in the future. But that's kind of a double-edged sword. You know, I on one hand, I agree with it, but there's two reasons that I don't agree with these regulations. One is you take a guy that can't afford hunting land, and all he's got to hunt is public land, and now you've taken away a trail camera. And that's, to me, the trail camera and the running the cameras is a huge part of the fun that I get out of deer hunting. I get probably as much fun out of running those cameras as I do shooting deer. And it extends my season. It just gives me a lot more time in the outdoors where I'm not doing anything. I'm not taking anything away from the resource. I'm not shooting a single animal while I'm out there running these cameras. And you take a guy that can't afford his own property, well, you've just taken that away from him by not allowing trail cameras on public land if that's all he's got to hunt. The other thing that I think is a can of worms that this regulation would not stand up in court is a private landowner. You're telling him that he can't have security cameras on his property. I think if someone wanted to take this to court, they would win. You know, private landowners have rights. There's things that they should be able to do on their property. You know, putting cameras out is one of those things. How can a state or any government agency try to tell a landowner, no, you can't have security cameras on your property? And how can they read a person's intent, you know, whether he's intending to take pictures of deer or trespassers? I just think that's a regulation that could be overturned, you know, with a court battle if someone ever wants to do that. But the whole AI thing, you know, I think we talked about that last week. I agree 100%. I think it really comes down to there's too many deer hunters who have to shoot a buck every year. They cannot go a season without shooting a buck. They're going to shoot the biggest antlered buck that they can find, and it doesn't matter if he's 5 years old or he's 2 years old. They're going to shoot the biggest antlered buck that they can get within their sights. You know, the regulations allow them to do it legally, so I don't know that it's someone else's place to tell them they shouldn't be doing it. It all comes down to the regulations, but you know, the hunters themselves are the ones that are basically creating this situation.
Yep, I agree. Okay. Yeah, we're going to move through to the next one. We got 2 more to answer.
This one comes from Brandon Calday from Rochester, Indiana. It says, Don and Terry, I want to start with thanking you both for the abundance of wisdom and guidance you've offered. You have shaved years off the learning curve for me, and I'm blessed to have been enjoying your podcast since you fellows started. My question is, how much do you think a mature buck's range shrinks? In all your years of experience, had you ever noticed a mature buck shrink down to, let's say, 10 acres and stay there full time except during the rut? And is it possible to set up a smaller property to do just that? I appreciate you gentlemen. God bless and best hunting this 2024 season. Well, Brandon, I don't think you can keep a buck on 10 acres. I do think that there are older mature bucks that really shrink down their range, but the area that they shrink it down to needs to include everything that they require. It starts with security. So they're going to need secure cover free of human intrusion to stay put. I mean, you put a buck on 10 acres and run one human through it, and he's probably not on that 10 acres anymore. So it needs to be big enough and secure enough that he can stay there and hide during daylight hours and not be disturbed. And then there needs to be a food source close by, prime food sources close by, where he doesn't have to travel that far to feed. I don't know. I would hate to say what the smallest home range of a buck might be. I think as I look back on the bucks I've hunted over the years, I think Smokey is probably the buck that I've shot that had the smallest home range. And even he was traveling probably, well, in the summertime, he would travel, trying to think of where I got his pictures. He was probably traveling 1.5 miles up and down this creek by my house. It was a big, long oval. It wasn't 1.5 miles wide, but it was 1.5 miles long. Acreage-wise, he was probably on about 200 or so acres, where he spent the vast majority of his time. The other thing you got to remember is winter in the region. He needs some good, if he's in a northern region anyway, and much of the Midwest too, he's going to need some good winter cover, to hide him when, and to protect him from the elements as much as anything, where he can get, out of the wind and, maybe in some cedar trees or some kind of a thicket where he can protect himself from the elements as much as possible. And to find a small location that's going to provide everything he needs for the entire year, it's not going to be 10 acres, I can tell you that. You're looking at probably, my guess would be, in very, very rare instances, maybe 100 acres.
And that's going to depend on the deer. I mean, you've seen that with different personality of deer that you've shot, but I think as a whole, we have seen and talked about many times on the podcast that the older the deer gets, the less it's going to range. He's figuring out where his place is with no human intrusion and what he needs to survive. And he doesn't need this social atmosphere of a bunch of different deer. He can live in a fence row. He can live in a subdivision. He can live in a giant patch of woods. The whitetail are so adaptive, but as he gets older, he's going to go to the place that he's the safest. And that might be a very little patch of woods or a thicket behind grandma's house even. I mean, it's amazing where these mature bucks will end up as they get older. So, but a lot of it's going to depend on that personality.
Right.
All right, we're going to get to the last question tonight, and this might take a little bit longer to answer, so we'll go ahead and put it up on the screen.
Okay, this one comes from Ryan Lawrence from Muskego, Wisconsin. It says, hi, Don and Terry. I am on a 70-acre property surrounded mostly by subdivisions. On occasion, I can see neighbor kids playing in their yards from several of my better funnel stands. Given this, lack of human presence is challenging. Deer feed in the surrounding yards and bird feeders all the time. In addition, this parcel is 1 to 2 miles away from a very large protective preserve with a huge deer population where deer grow very old and thrive. These urban deer are very accustomed to humans given the number of recreational activities seen in the park. A 200-inch buck was hit and killed by a vehicle less than 2 years ago during the rut, which I was able to claim. The deer population on my 70 acres is small, even with continually planting plots of brassicas, clover, alfalfa, winter wheat, beans, and corn, with some mature apple and pear trees as well. Every year I do get a decent buck or two on camera, and harvested my biggest last year at 150 inches, but I've seen 180 plus in the past. Any thoughts as to how to be more of a draw for these city giants? Well, Ryan, it sounds like you've got just a golden opportunity, because in these subdivisions, I'm guessing that there's not too many 70-acre properties. So you got one of the biggest properties in your neighborhood, and you've got control over it. First of all, you got to recognize that city deer and city mature bucks are way two different things. You're going to see those city deer feeding in people's yards in daylight. You're going to see them, along the roads in the subdivision or whatever, and it's not going to bother them. A mature buck is a totally different animal. He is not going to be seen doing that. Rarely during the rut. If he's on the trail of a hot doe, you might see him. You might see a decent buck cruising midday through somebody's yard or something. But to try to set up and kill these mature bucks in that situation is going to be very difficult. But with your 70 acres, the thing that's lacking in your area, and it doesn't matter where you're hunting, what kind of property you got to look at what is in shortest supply in your whole neighborhood. What's the weakest link, not just on your property, but in the whole neighborhood? So it sounds like your deer have plenty of places to feed, whether it be bird feeders in somebody's backyard or whatever. It sounds like there's plenty of places to feed. Now food's going to be part of the equation on your farm too. But the big thing is, if you want to have mature deer, you need to get those bucks bedded on your place. You're 1 to 2 miles from the big preserve. I mean, you can't be sitting there on your food plot expecting a deer to walk a mile or more to get to your food sources in daylight. You need to get that buck bedded right there on your 70 acres. The biggest percentage of your 70 acres needs to be in thick, totally undisturbed bedding cover. And if you do that, you should have some of the biggest bucks in the area bedded on your farm. I don't know if that 70 acres includes your house or what all, but if I had 70 acres in a situation like you're talking, probably 60 of it would be sanctuary and 10 of it would be food. And my hunting would be done only on the edge of that property. And how it's laid out is going to be pretty important too, because you need to create travel patterns. It's going to be impossible for me to just answer that, on this podcast without even seeing an aerial being there. But you need as much thick, undisturbed bedding cover as you can possibly have on your 70 acres. And you should be able to, and it wouldn't even matter if you was in an urban area like you're describing or other type of area. If you've got 70 acres and you can keep people off of it, and you can provide thick, undisturbed bedding cover, you should have some of the better bucks in the area bedded there.
Yeah, I agree. But, man, there's a golden opportunity. I'm actually going to visit a farm on Sunday afternoon of a friend of mine here local that got access to a property that's right up against a bunch of subdivisions, but it's about 90 acres. So, you have to take what that property has to give, accessing that. They're a whole lot more used to human scent, but they know exactly where that line is of where it's safe and where it's not. But, You also might have the neighbor kids wanting to go build a fort in the woods right in the middle of your sanctuary. There's a disadvantage to all that too. So we're going to go see what we can do with that. But great question. Thanks, Ryan.
That's going to be my next comment. The challenge might be keeping people out of your 70-acre, 60-acre sanctuary, whatever you end up with. Because in those urban type settings, there's going to be somebody in that neighborhood who thinks that he is free to just walk wherever he wants in the wild woods around his home.
I mean, when I was a kid, we had woods behind us, and it was the biggest playground ever. I would have hated, now looking back on it, if there was a guy after a mature buck with us back there playing around. So,
yep.
All right, well, what do you got planned for this week?
Well, I got Steve Shields coming into town to do some video work. That's probably the biggest thing. I'm going to be doing that for 2 or 3 days. About it. Waiting on my food plots to pop out of the ground. Most of them are doing really fantastic, but I got a couple. That new corn I planted is one, and a couple soybean plots that I'm waiting to pop out of the ground.
Absolutely. Well, I tell you what, this last month, people have been so supportive of us, so I just want to thank everybody for that. But I tell you what, I've learned a lesson over the last month, and I've been busy. It's not like I haven't been busy, but, here over the last couple of days, things have been put into perspective pretty close about time and how much just absolutely ridiculous running and gunning and working, 18 hours a day. My wife and I last weekend just got in the car and went for a 2-hour drive. I can't tell you we've ever done that. So, there's a lot of things that happen in your life that put perspective in things, and really grateful for all the support, everybody. It means a lot. But we got big news the next couple of weeks. There's new announcements from Real World. There's new announcements from Chasing Giants. We are at a very exciting part of our journey with our businesses and platforms, and I'm just so excited to take everybody along for the ride. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, it is. One thing I want to throw out as well is, so this podcast is going to release on Sunday, June 2nd. Started something probably a year and a half or so ago called Sunday Night Prayer Time, Chasing Giants. And they've got a number of different guys that take turns on Sunday evening. They release a short video. And I've done, what have I done? One so far.
You've done 2.
But I've done 2. So this Sunday, I'm getting ready to do my 3rd one. And I've got a message. I want to encourage all you guys to get on YouTube, find this Sunday Night Prayer Time, because I'm gonna talk about something that most preachers absolutely avoid. It's something that's been on my heart for a number of years. And but most preachers won't talk about it for fear of offending people, and I'm going to do it in a way that I hope I don't offend anybody, but I'm not going to avoid tough topics. And I thank Terry for starting that. I hear a lot about that from different folks that listen to it, tune in every Sunday. So if you're listening to this podcast and you don't know about it or haven't been tuning in, every week there's a message from someone, a Christian deer hunter, that just shares what's on their heart that week and prays for, the listener and all that. So I encourage you to tune in.
Yeah, we usually put that on the Chasing Giants YouTube channel, and then it's also on my social media. So hope you guys tune in. It's been fun. We've started, I think we're at about 40 weeks of this thing, where every Sunday evening around 7 o'clock Eastern, and there's just a rotation of guys that are our friends and people that we've gotten to know. So it's been quite a joy to have different people, and why not just use a platform like deer hunting to encourage everybody and pray for everybody. It's awesome to see the community and family come together like that.
For sure, it's just I shouldn't be surprised, but it's almost amazing to see how Chasing Giants, which started as a deer hunting podcast, has morphed into this Sunday Night Prayer Time at Lester's feet, and just almost like a family of like-minded people from around the country. They're all country conservative type people that have strong family values. Most of them are probably Christians that listen to this podcast. If not, we sure give them something to think about. And it's just kind of crazy how this deer hunting podcast has morphed into so many other things.
Well, we could definitely probably get more views every week if we were following the woke and watching what we say, but that's not ever been what we've been about. So the people that are with us, we appreciate the support. It's we're not going to cave to that narrative just for more views or listeners. We ruined that a long time ago, didn't we?
No chance of that happening.
All right. Well, that's going to wrap up the show. Won't you take us out, Don? Everybody have a good week.
Yeah, God bless everyone. Have a great week. See you back here next week.
Chasing Giants has been brought to you by Osseo Camo. Buy Farm Real Estate Company, 360 Hunting Blinds, Victory Chevrolet, Real World Wildlife Products, Matthews Archery, Novix Tree Stands, Gingerich Tree Farm, WildlifeFarming.com, Quiet Cat, and Vortex Optics. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode of Chasing Giants.